The winter of 1873 was a monster. It came early to Montana, howling down from the mountains with a fury that made old-timers spit and shake their heads. Snow wasn't just falling, it was a solid white wall, erasing the world, burying fences, wiping trails off the map. The wind was a living thing, a predator with teeth of ice that sliced at any exposed skin. Through that hellscape, a woman stumbled. Her name was Sarah Whitman, and she was dying. Her dress was frozen cardboard, her shawl a useless rag. Ice clung to her hair like a cruel crown, and her lips were a deep, terrifying purple. Every step was a war against the snow, a war she was losing. She'd been walking since dawn, cast out from the town of Cedar Ridge. They didn't want her kind there. Whispers had turned to accusations. Lies had become truth. A banker's wife claimed she'd seen Sarah with her husband. It was a lie, but in a town like Cedar Ridge, a lie was a death sentence. They took her home, her job, her good name. They threw stones and hissed words that cut deeper than the wind. Now, with darkness closing in and the cold sinking its claws into her bones, she knew it was over. Her body was shaking itself apart. Then through the blinding white she saw it, a shape, dark against the snow. A barn. With the last ounce of strength in her body, she fell toward it. The door creaked open, and the warmth inside was a shock, the smell of hay and horse a forgotten comfort. She collapsed, pulling straw over herself with hands that no longer felt like her own. Her mind was fraying. She thought of her husband, James, gone 2 years now. She thought of the life she was supposed to have. Then she thought of nothing at all. Her eyes drifted shut. It was over. Thomas Morrison felt the storm in his bones. At 35, he ran a ranch that was his whole world, built with sweat and shrewd decisions. The blizzard worried him. He pulled his collar tight and pushed his way from the house to the barn, needing to check on his horses. He shoved the heavy door open, lantern held high, and stopped dead. There, in a heap of hay and frozen fabric, was a person. His first thought was of drifters, of trouble. He moved closer, the lantern light spilling across the form. It wasn't a drifter, it was a woman, and she was all but dead. Thomas knelt beside her. Her skin was like touching stone. Her lips were blue. Her breath was a faint, shallow whisper he could barely detect. Ice had formed on her eyelashes. He'd seen death on the frontier. He knew its face, and it was staring right at him from this woman's still features. If he left her, she'd be gone in an hour. He didn't even think about it. He scooped her up. She weighed nothing, a broken bird. He fought his way back through the storm, the 50 yards to the house feeling like 50 miles. The wind tried to rip her from his arms, but he held on. Inside, he laid her by the hearth, piling logs on the fire until it roared. But the warmth wasn't touching her. Her skin stayed a ghastly gray white. He piled blankets on her, but it wasn't enough. He knew it wasn't enough. The cold was too deep. Then he remembered the old tales, the things mountain men did in desperate times. The only way to save someone frozen to their core. Skin to skin. Body heat. It was scandalous. Improper. But propriety was a ghost in the face of death. He carried her to his bedroom, his mind a blur of purpose. He worked fast, his fingers clumsy on her frozen dress. He kept his eyes averted, trying to give her the dignity the world had denied her. He stripped down to his union suit, got into the cold bed, and pulled her body against his. It was like holding a block of ice. He wrapped the heavy quilts around them both, a human furnace against the raging storm. And he held her. For hours he held her, feeling the impossible cold of her skin against his, pouring his own life's warmth into her. Slowly, so slowly he thought he was imagining it, her breathing deepened. The blue faded from her lips. Then she began to shiver, a violent, rattling shiver. It was a good sign. Her body was starting to fight back. Near dawn she made a sound, a small gasp. Thomas had been dozing, waking every few minutes in a panic. Now as consciousness returned to her, he felt her go rigid in his arms. "Easy," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're safe. You nearly froze in my barn. I brought you inside." She was stiff with fear, or maybe it was shame. Her eyes were wide in the dim light. "I'm Thomas Morrison," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. This is my ranch. You were dying. This, this was the only way. Understanding bloomed in her eyes, and then came the tears. He didn't know if they were from relief or horror, but she was alive. And in the heart of that monstrous storm, that was all that mattered. Sarah Whitman woke to a crackling fire, and a warmth so deep it felt like a dream. For a moment she was lost. Then memory came crashing back. The snow, the town that hated her, the barn, the cold that had seeped into her soul. She was in a bed, a real bed. Her tattered dress was hanging by the fire to dry. Someone had put her in a large man's shirt that came down to her knees. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through the warmth. Where was she? Who had done this? The door opened. A man entered, tall and broad, with kind blue eyes that held a wary look, like he was approaching a spooked horse. "You're awake," he said, his voice simple and direct. He set a tray with a bowl of broth on the table beside her. "You need to eat." Sarah clutched the quilts to her chin. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Thomas Morrison. This is my ranch. You nearly froze to death in my barn last night." He kept his distance, giving her space. "The storm's still raging. You're safe here, till it passes." Safe. The word felt like a lie. She hadn't felt safe in so long. "My dress. It's by the fire. Seen better days." He nodded toward the chair. "My late wife's things are in that trunk. You're welcome to them." Late wife, so he was alone too, a widower. "I shouldn't be here," she said, the shame rising in her throat. "If people knew your reputation." A flash of anger crossed his face, but it wasn't for her. "People can think what they like. I don't leave folks to die in a blizzard." "You don't understand," she said, the words tumbling out. "They say I'm—" She couldn't say the word, couldn't give voice to the poison they'd used to destroy her. "I know who you are," Thomas said, and his quiet voice stopped her cold. "Sarah Whitman. The town turned on you over gossip." He shook his head, looking out the window at the swirling snow. "Cedar Ridge loves its scandals more than it loves its neighbors." She stared at him, stunned into silence. He knew. He knew who she was, what they called her, and he had saved her anyway. "I've lived alone out here for 3 years," he went on, his back still to her. "Since my Elizabeth died. I know loneliness. I know what it's like when folks whisper, and I know the difference between gossip and the truth." "The truth doesn't matter in that town," she said, the bitterness sharp on her tongue. "No," he agreed, turning back to face her. "It doesn't, but it matters out here." He nodded toward the broth. "You eat. Rest. I'll see to the animals." He was almost out the door when he paused. "There's something else you need to know," he said, his voice suddenly rough. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Last night, blankets weren't enough. The cold had gone too deep." He cleared his throat, a faint flush rising on his weathered cheeks. "The only way to warm someone that far gone is body heat. Direct." The air crackled with the unspoken words. "I did what I had to do to keep you alive. I kept it as proper as I could." Sarah's face burned, but underneath the shame was something else. A wave of stunned gratitude. This man hadn't just saved her. He'd risked his own reputation, done something deeply improper, not out of desire, but out of pure, simple decency. He had shown her a kindness she thought no longer existed in the world. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded once, and then he was gone, leaving her alone with the crackling fire and the howling wind, and the stunning realization that a stranger had just saved her in more ways than one. After he left, Sarah slowly ate the broth, feeling the warmth spread through her, chasing out the last of the deep bone-aching cold. When she felt stronger, she went to the trunk. It smelled of lavender and old memories. Elizabeth Morrison had been a smaller woman, but Sarah found a simple brown wool dress that fit well enough. Dressed, she felt more like herself, less like a victim. The house was simple but solid. A main room with a kitchen at one end, 2 small bedrooms. It was a man's house now, but a woman's touch lingered like a ghost. An apron on a hook, a half-finished sampler in a basket. A life cut short. Sarah knew that feeling all too well. She couldn't just sit there. She went to the kitchen. The least she could do was make a meal. She found flour, beans, salt pork, simple food for a hard life. As she worked, kneading dough for biscuits, a strange sense of peace settled over her. For the first time in months, she wasn't the town pariah. She was just a woman in a warm kitchen, cooking a meal. When Thomas returned, stomping snow from his boots, he stopped short in the doorway, surprised to see her up and working. "You should be resting." "I've rested enough," she said, setting a plate on the table. "And I don't take charity without giving something back." They ate in silence, the storm a third presence in the room, howling and shaking the log walls. It sealed them in, two strangers bound by a blizzard in an act of desperation. "How long do you think it'll last?" she asked. "Couple more days, maybe. Longest I've seen was a week." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "You're welcome to stay until it's safe." He hesitated. "Where were you headed? When you left town?" She let out a short, bitter laugh. "Away, just away. No family to go to. Nowhere. I thought maybe I could find work in another town. Somewhere they didn't know me." "Stories have a way of following a person," Thomas said gently. "Then I'll go farther," she insisted. "California, Oregon." "Alone? In winter?" He shook his head. "That's just a different way of freezing to death." "What other choice do I have?" The words were sharper than she intended. "I can't go back there. No decent person will have me under their roof." "You're under my roof." She flushed. "You're not, I mean," a small smile touched his lips, the first she'd seen. "Not decent? Most folks in town would agree with you. A man living alone keeps to himself. They whisper about me too, Sarah." She blinked at the use of her first name. "My point is," he said, his voice serious again, "I know what it's like to be on the outside. And maybe that's why I don't give a damn what they think." He told her about his wife, Elizabeth, how a fever had taken her 3 years ago, how he'd buried her himself on the hill behind the house. The pain was still there in his voice, a raw edge that grief leaves behind. "We all carry our sorrows," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Question is what we do with them." That night he insisted she take the bedroom. He would sleep by the fire. Lying in the dark, in Elizabeth Morrison's bed, Sarah listened to the storm and thought about the impossible turn her life had taken. Yesterday she was walking into a blizzard to die. Today she was warm, fed, and for the first time in a very long time, she had been treated with respect. It was dangerous, this feeling, this small spark of hope. She knew it had to end. When the storm passed, she would have to leave. He would go back to his solitary life, and she would go away. But for now, for these few stolen days, two lonely souls were sheltering from the storm. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The storm broke on the fourth day. The world it left behind was silent and stunningly beautiful, buried under a thick blanket of white. Sarah had been at the ranch for 4 days, and a quiet routine had formed between them. She cooked and cleaned, bringing a woman's order back to the neglected house. He worked outside, a relentless battle against the snow. They talked carefully at first, then with a growing ease. She told herself every morning that she would leave, but then she would find clothes that needed mending, or see the satisfaction on his face when she served him a hot meal, and she would stay one more day. The roads were still impassable. It was a good excuse. Thomas never asked her to leave. He never made her feel like a burden. This morning she was humming as she made coffee, an old hymn her mother used to sing. She hadn't hummed in years. Thomas came in from shoveling, his cheeks red with cold. "Path's clear to the barn," he announced. "Sit," she said, setting a plate of biscuits on the table. "You've been out there for hours." The simple domesticity of it all made her heart ache. This was the life that had been stolen from her. "Sarah," he said, his voice careful, "the road to town should be passable in a day or two." She turned her back to him, pretending to be busy at the stove. "I see. I'm not kicking you out," he said quickly. "Just, you could leave if you wanted." "And go where?" The bitterness was back. "To another town that will hear the stories? To another place where I'll be run out?" "You don't know that would happen." "Don't I?" she snapped, turning to face him. "A woman alone, with no family, no references. You know what they think of women like me." "You're not like anything," he said, his voice firm. "You're a good woman who got caught in a lie." That doesn't matter when you're cold and hungry. The silence stretched between them. There's another option, he said finally. She waited. You could stay. Here. Her heart hammered against her ribs. I need the help, he rushed on, a faint color rising in his cheeks. The house, the garden come spring. I can't pay you much, but there's room and board. It would be proper, he added quickly. You'd have your room. I'd stay out here. A business arrangement. People would talk, she whispered. Let them. It would ruin what's left of your reputation. I told you, he said, his voice low and intense. I don't care what Cedar Ridge thinks. He paced to the window, staring out at the snow. Elizabeth, she had plans for this place. A real garden, chickens, a life. After she died, I let it all go. Didn't seem to be a point. But these last few days, seeing the house alive again, he trailed off, frustrated. I'm not asking for anything improper, Sarah. Just stay. Help me. Tears pricked her eyes. This was a lifeline, a chance she never thought she'd get. But fear held her back. What happens when you want a real wife? A proper woman from a good family? A shadow passed over his face. I had a wife. I don't see the point in looking for another. The raw honesty in his voice made her decision. All right, Thomas, she whispered. I'll stay. The relief on his face was so profound, it was almost painful to see. Good, he said, turning away to hide it. That's good. Later that day, he took her to the barn. He wanted to show her something. He led her to a stall where a beautiful mare stood, her belly swollen. She's due in the spring, he said, stroking the horse's neck. Elizabeth picked her out. Her name is Penny. The horse nuzzled Sarah's hand, and she felt a connection to this place, to this man, to the wife he had lost. As they walked back to the house, Sarah slipped on a patch of hidden ice. Thomas's hand shot out, catching her arm, steadying her. For a long moment they stood there, close enough for her to see the flecks of gold in his blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of his hand through her coat. Careful, he said softly. His voice was thick. He let her go, and they walked the rest of the way in silence. But something had changed. The business arrangement already felt like a lie. That night, lying in her bed, Sarah allowed herself to hope. A garden in the spring, a new foal, a life. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was a beginning, a chance to build something new from the ashes of two broken lives. Outside, the Montana winter held the world in its grip. But inside the small ranch house, two hearts were beginning to thaw. Spring fought its way into the Montana territory, a slow, grudging battle against the snow. Sarah had been at the ranch for 3 months. The arrangement had settled into a rhythm that felt less like business and more like something else, something dangerous and fragile and full of hope. She found herself watching Thomas, the way he gentled a young colt, the patience in his hands, the way the sun caught the gold in his hair, the quiet strength that radiated from him. He had shown her nothing but kindness, a steady, unwavering acceptance that was slowly healing the wounds inside her. Want to try? He called one afternoon, seeing her watching him in the corral. He took her hand to place it on the lead rope, and the simple touch sent a jolt through her. He stood behind her, his body warm and solid at her back, his breath stirring her hair as he murmured instructions. The colt, sensing her distraction, nuzzled her hand, and Sarah laughed. A real, bright, joyful laugh. The sound seemed to surprise them both. Thomas stepped back quickly, as if he'd been burned. You're a natural, he said, his voice rough. They worked side by side in the garden plot, turning over the cold earth. They had gone into town for supplies once, a tense trip where Sarah had felt the stares and heard the whispers. Thomas had stood by her, his jaw tight, his presence a silent challenge to the whole town. This simple work, digging in the dirt, planning where the carrots and beans would go, felt more real than anything she'd known for years. As they walked back to the house at sunset, she stumbled. He caught her just as he had on the ice. But this time, he didn't let go right away. Sarah, he started, then stopped, his eyes full of conflict. I know, she whispered. We can't. A humorless laugh escaped him. When has proper ever done us any good? Then what's stopping us? You work for me, he said, finally letting her go. You're under my protection. I won't be that kind of man. And if I said this was my choice too? Is it? He challenged, his voice gentle but firm. Or is it just gratitude? Or you feeling like you owe me something? No, Sarah. You deserve better than that. He was right to ask. She didn't even know her own heart anymore. But that night, she lay awake, the feel of his hands still burning on her arms. The next morning, he had to leave to help a neighbor. Before he left, he did something unexpected. He taught her to use a rifle. Wolves, drifters, he explained. It's best to be prepared. He stood behind her again, adjusting her stance, his touch careful and professional. But she felt it all the same. Squeeze, don't pull, he said. The rifle cracked, and the tin can he'd set on a fence post flew into the air. She hit it. She actually hit it. A thrill shot through her. You're a natural at this, too, he said, a proud smile on his face. When he left, the house felt cavernously empty. She found herself watching the road, waiting for his return. That afternoon, her new skill was put to the test. A rider appeared, a drifter with a mean look in his eye. Sarah grabbed the rifle and stepped onto the porch. That's close enough, she called out. The man smirked. Heard in town Morrison was keeping a scarlet woman out here. Didn't hear nothing about a wedding? The insult burned, but she kept her voice steady. What you heard and what's true are two different things. Move along. Maybe I could use some hospitality, he said, his hand drifting toward the gun on his hip. She didn't hesitate. She fired, kicking up dirt right by his horse's hooves. The animal screamed and reared. Next one won't miss, she said, her hands surprisingly steady as she chambered another round. Get! The drifter stared at her, his smirk gone, replaced by shock. Then he wheeled his horse and galloped away. Sarah stumbled back inside, her legs shaking uncontrollably. When Thomas returned at sunset, he found her at the table, the rifle laid across it. He took one look at her face and was by her side in an instant. What happened? She told him everything. When she finished, he pulled her into his arms, crushing her against his chest. I shouldn't have left you, he muttered into her hair. I should have known. I handled it, she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. You taught me well. He could have hurt you, he said, his arms tightening. I can't lose you too, Sarah. I can't. The words were a raw admission, hanging in the air between them. She pulled back, just enough to see his face. The fear in his eyes was for her. But there was something else there, too. Something deeper. Thomas, she whispered. He cupped her face in his rough hands. She thought he was going to kiss her. She wanted him to. But then he seemed to remember himself, and he stepped back, his hands falling to his sides. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Don't apologize, she said softly. Not for caring. That night she heard him unroll his bedroll right outside her bedroom door. He was standing guard, and in the darkness of her room, Sarah finally admitted the truth to herself. She was in love with Thomas Morrison. It wasn't gratitude. It was real. It had grown in the quiet moments, in the shared work, in the steady kindness he showed her every single day. The only question was, what was she going to do about it? The first real sign of trouble came on a Sunday. Sarah was hanging laundry when she saw the riders, a dust cloud on the horizon coming from town. It wasn't one or two riders on business. It was a group, 6 of them, and they were riding hard. Thomas, she called, her voice tight with a familiar dread. Company! He came out of the barn, took one look, and his face became a mask of stone. Get inside, Sarah. Now! She did as he said, but she watched from the window. She recognized the men. Harold Garrett from the general store, Carl Hensley from the bank, and William Porter, the judge's son. Men who considered themselves the moral center of Cedar Ridge. Morrison! Garrett shouted, not even bothering to dismount. We need a word. Thomas stood on the porch, his posture relaxed, but Sarah knew he was coiled as tight as a spring. Say your piece. It's about the woman, William Porter sneered, his face twisted with self-righteousness. The whole town is talking. It ain't decent, you keeping her here. Since when is giving a person a job indecent? Thomas asked, his voice dangerously calm. Work? Hensley laughed, a nasty, knowing sound. Is that what you're calling it? We all know what kind of woman she is. Sarah saw Thomas's shoulders tense. His hand drifted to his hip, where his gun belt usually hung. But it was Sunday. He'd left it inside. "Careful, Hensley," Thomas said quietly. "That's a lady you're talking about." "Lady!" Garrett spat. "She's a—" "Choose your next word very carefully," Thomas interrupted, his voice dropping to a low growl, "because I'll make you eat it." The men shifted in their saddles. They hadn't expected this. They had expected him to be ashamed, to be intimidated. "We're respectable men," Porter blustered, swinging down from his horse. "We have wives and daughters to protect. Having her here, flaunting—" "Mrs. Whitman works for me," Thomas said, cutting him off. "She keeps my house. Everything is proper. If your minds are in the gutter, that's your own failing." "You expect us to believe that?" Hensley pushed. "A man alone for years with a woman like that? We weren't born yesterday, Morrison." "No," Thomas shot back. "You were born small-minded and mean. Now get off my land." "Or what?" Porter swaggered forward, emboldened by his friends. "You'll take us all on? For her? If I have to." Porter kept coming. "Maybe we should ask the lady herself what she has to say about this arrangement," he said, turning toward the house. He never finished the sentence. Thomas's fist moved like lightning, catching Porter square on the jaw. The judge's son went down in a heap. The yard exploded. Sarah watched in horror as the 5 remaining men swarmed Thomas. He was strong, but it was 5 against 1. They were beating him. He took a blow to the ribs and staggered. A kick from behind sent him to one knee. That was it. She wasn't going to let this happen. She grabbed the rifle. She burst onto the porch and fired a shot into the air. The crack of the Winchester froze them all. "The next one goes into a man," she said, her voice ringing with a cold fury she didn't know she possessed. She levered another round into the chamber. "Now back away from him." "Look at that," Hensley sneered, but he took a step back. "The whore is protective." "It's done," Sarah said, the rifle still aimed at his chest. "You've had your say. Now leave." "This ain't over," Garrett warned, helping the dazed Porter to his feet. "You can't protect her forever." "I don't need his protection," Sarah said. "As you can see." They mounted their horses, their faces dark with hate. As they rode off, Porter yelled back, "You've got 1 week to send her packing, Morrison. 1 week. After that, we come back, and we won't be talking." Sarah lowered the rifle, her arms trembling, and rushed to Thomas. His face was a mess, his lips split, one eye already swelling shut. "This is my fault," she sobbed as she helped him inside. "I have to leave." "No." He grabbed her hand, wincing as he moved. "You're not running because of them. They'll kill you, Thomas. They'll burn this place to the ground. I'm not worth that." "You are to me." The words hung in the air, simple and profound. She stared at him, at this good, honorable man who had just taken a beating for her. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do I matter so much?" He reached up and touched her cheek. "You know why." "Say it," she begged. "I need to hear it." "I love you, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I've loved you since that first week. I love your strength, your kindness. I love you, and I'll be damned if I let those sons of bitches drive you away." "I love you too," she cried, "but love won't stop them." "Then we'll face them together," he said fiercely. "I'm done pretending. You're not my housekeeper, Sarah. You're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with." He struggled to sit up, his eyes blazing. "Marry me, not someday, now, this week. Let them come for my wife and see how that sits with them." She gasped. "Thomas, a marriage won't make them accept me. It will make it worse for you." "I don't care about them. I care about you. About us." His grip on her hands tightened. "Say yes, Sarah. Be my wife." Looking at his battered, determined face, she felt all her fear wash away, replaced by a fierce, protective love. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He pulled her into a kiss, gentle and full of promise. They had 1 week to get married, 1 week to prepare for a war. But they would face it together. The night before the deadline, the air in the small house was thick with tension. Thomas was cleaning his rifle for the 3rd time. Sarah stood at the window, peering into the darkness. They had been married for 4 days. A quiet ceremony performed by a traveling preacher, Father Miguel, with two of the Mexican ranch hands as witnesses. The simple gold band on her finger, once Elizabeth's, felt both heavy and unbelievably precious. Anything? Thomas asked. Not yet. Maybe they won't come. They'll come, he said grimly. Men like that can't back down. A sudden knock on the door made them both jump. Thomas grabbed the rifle. Who is it? It's Sam Brooks, boss. Brought some friends. Relief washed over them as Thomas unbarred the door. Sam, his loyal foreman, stood on the porch. Behind him were 6 other men, ranch hands, small farmers, men who lived on the fringes of Cedar Ridge society. Heard you might have some trouble, Sam said, his face serious. Thought you could use the company. Sam, I can't ask you to do this. You didn't ask, another man said. We volunteered. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. These men who barely knew her were willing to stand with them. They didn't have to wait long. Just after midnight, she saw them. Torches, a river of fire moving through the darkness. It wasn't 6 men this time. It was more like 20. The mob had grown. The men took their positions. The mob stopped just out of rifle range, a pack of wolves circling. Harold Garrett rode forward. Morrison, send out the woman, and we'll leave you in peace. Mrs. Morrison is my wife, Thomas shouted back from the porch. She's staying right where she belongs. Mrs. Morrison? Someone in the crowd laughed, a vicious, ugly sound. The laugh was cut short by the crack of a rifle. Sam Brooks's warning shot kicked up dust at the man's feet. Watch your tongue when you speak of a man's wife. You brought help, Garrett sneered. It won't be enough. Maybe not, Thomas called out, but some of you will die finding out. Who wants to be first? That gave them pause. But then William Porter shoved his way to the front, his face still bruised and swollen with hate. I'll go first, he snarled, for what you did to me, Morrison, and for harboring that. This time it was Sarah who fired. Her bullet whipped Porter's hat clean off his head. The next one goes lower, she called out, her voice clear and cold in the night air. I've had enough of your filth. You hear that? Someone yelled from the crowd. She threatened him. That's attempted murder. That's a warning shot to a trespasser, a new voice boomed. A rider was parting the mob like the Red Sea. The torchlight glinted off the star on his chest. It was Sheriff Ben Cooper. Sarah's heart sank. She expected him to side with the town. Sheriff, Garrett began, we're just protecting the moral fabric of our... By forming a lynch mob, Harold? The sheriff's voice was dry as dust. She's a legally married woman living on her husband's property. Cooper cut him off. I checked the records myself. Father Miguel filed the papers. Whatever Mrs. Morrison was before, she's a respectable married woman now. You can't be serious, Garrett sputtered. Everyone know. I know what gossip says, Cooper interrupted, his voice rising. I also know I saw Martha Hensley sneaking out of your storeroom last Tuesday, Harold. Should we form a mob about that? Or about Judge Porter's son getting thrown out of a cat house in Billings last month? A shocked silence fell over the mob. Porter's face turned beet red. That's different, he mumbled. Is it? The sheriff asked. Last I checked, I enforce the law, not your hypocritical gossip. And the law says these people have a right to live in peace. Now disperse before I start making arrests. His hand rested on the butt of his pistol. The mob began to break apart, the righteous anger fizzling out into shame and fear. This isn't over, Garrett snarled at Thomas as he rode off. He pointed a trembling finger at Sarah. You'll bring him nothing but ruin. Sarah felt Thomas tense, but she put a hand on his arm. Mr. Garrett, she called out, her voice strong and clear. I've brought him happiness. I've brought him love. I've brought this house back to life. If you call that ruin, then I'll gladly give him more. The sheriff stayed until the last torch disappeared. He tipped his hat to Sarah. Ma'am, Morrison. Sheriff? Thomas called out. Why? Cooper paused his horse. My wife died in childbirth, he said, his voice quiet. The only person in town who would help was a woman everyone called trash. She saved my daughter's life. I learned that night that reputation and character are 2 very different things. Sleep well. After their friends had gone, Thomas barred the door and pulled Sarah into his arms. They just stood there holding on to each other. The sheriff surprised me, she whispered. He's a complicated man, Thomas said, his hand stroking her hair. He touched the ring on her finger. We're really married. They can't take that away. No, she agreed. They can't. That night they came together not just in passion, but in defiance. They were husband and wife, and they were claiming their right to love, to live, to be. The battle was over, but they both knew the war had just begun. The town's revenge was quiet, and it was brutal. The boycott started the very next day. No one in Cedar Ridge would sell supplies to Thomas Morrison. The mill wouldn't grind his grain. The bank called in a loan that wasn't due for 6 months. It was economic warfare, meant to starve them out. We'll manage, Thomas said, his jaw set like granite. But Sarah saw the strain in his eyes. Their supplies dwindled. Flour, coffee, salt. The things they couldn't grow themselves were running out. The neighboring ranchers, once friendly, now turned their backs. Contracts were canceled. His reputation, built over years of hard work, was being systematically destroyed. The final blow came when his foreman, Sam Brooks, showed up, hat in hand. I'm sorry, boss, he mumbled, not meeting Thomas's eyes. My wife, my kids are being shunned at school. I have to quit. After he left, the silence in the house was deafening. The ranch was dying. I'll leave, Sarah said suddenly. I'll go away. You can tell them I ran off. They'll forgive you. No, his voice was iron. For better or for worse, Sarah. This is the worst. We'll get through it. How? She cried. We can't do this alone. Just then riders appeared. It was Juan Martinez and 2 other men from the Mexican settlement. Senor Morrison, Juan said, a smile in his eyes. We hear you need hands. We need work. Juan, I can barely afford to pay you. We will work for shares, Juan said, and supplies. The town may not sell to you, but they still sell to us. We can be middlemen. It was a lifeline, a thin, fragile thread of hope, but it was enough. For a month, they held on. The new ranch hands were loyal and hardworking. The ranch began to breathe again. Sarah learned to make tortillas, to stretch their dwindling supplies in new ways. And then, one night, she woke to the smell of smoke. Thomas! Fire! They burst out of the house into a nightmare. The barn was an inferno. Flames shot 100 feet into the sky. The terrified screams of the horses trapped inside ripped through the night. The horses! Thomas yelled, running toward the blaze. No! Sarah screamed, grabbing his arm. You'll be killed! He threw her off and plunged into the roaring fire. She didn't hesitate. She followed him in. The heat was a physical blow, searing her skin, stealing her breath. Through the smoke and chaos, she saw Thomas wrestling with stall doors, driving the panicked animals out. A flaming beam crashed down. Get out! He roared, pushing the pregnant mare Penny toward the door. Sarah grabbed a blanket, threw it over another horse's head, and led it to safety. They went back in, again and again. Her lungs burned. Her skin blistered. On her last trip, she found him. A heavy beam had fallen, pinning his leg. Go! He gasped, his face gray with pain. Save yourself! Not without you! She braced herself, adrenaline surging through her, and lifted with a strength she didn't know she had. The beam moved just enough. He dragged himself free. They stumbled out together just as the entire roof collapsed in a shower of sparks and flame. They lay on the ground, gasping for air, as Juan and the others arrived to help fight the flames from spreading to the house. Dawn revealed the utter devastation. The barn was gone. Their tools, their winter hay supply, everything. And Thomas's leg was a ruin. She could see the bones sticking through the torn flesh. We need the doctor, she said, her voice shaking. He won't come, Thomas grunted through the pain. Then I'll make him. She saddled a horse and rode for town like a fury. She pounded on Dr. Pritchard's door until he answered. I told Morrison, he started. She pushed past him into his house. Your oath says, do no harm. Does that include letting a man die because you don't approve of his wife? Now see here. No, you see, she said, her voice deadly calm. Thomas Morrison's leg is shattered. He will lose it, or he will die without you. You will come with me now, or I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone in this territory knows you let a man die over gossip. You can't threaten. I have lost everything because of this town, she interrupted, stepping so close he could feel her fury. My reputation, My home. I have nothing left to lose. But you, doctor, you have everything. Come with me now, or I will tear it all down. He came. He worked in angry silence, setting the bone, stitching the wound. He left medicine and took her money and departed without a word. That night, Sheriff Cooper came by. Barn fires happen, he said, his eyes scanning the ashes. There were no lanterns in there, Sarah said, too exhausted to play games. Figured, he said, but without proof, my hands are tied. He looked at her, soot-stained and fierce. You got him out? He's my husband, she said simply. As Thomas tossed and turned with fever, his hand found hers. He mumbled her name in his delirium. She knew then that she wouldn't change a thing. They could burn everything she had. They could take it all. She would face hell itself for this man. The fire was meant to break them, but it had only forged them into something stronger. Thomas's recovery was a slow, agonizing crawl. For weeks he was helpless, consumed by fever and pain. Sarah ran the ranch. With Juan and his men, she fought to keep their world from collapsing. They built makeshift shelters for the horses, but with no barn and no way to buy feed. Every day was a desperate struggle. Then the weather turned. An October blizzard, a monster that came out of nowhere, slamming into them with shocking violence. They barely had time to move the horses to the sheltered side of the house before it hit. For 3 days, the world was a howling vortex of white. The 7 of them were crammed into the small house, rationing what little food they had left. On the second night, over the roar of the wind, they heard it. The desperate, terrified bellowing of the cattle herd, caught out in the open. Thomas tried to get out of bed. The herd, he gasped. They'll freeze. You can't even walk, Sarah said, pushing him back down. I'll go. No! He grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. You'll die out there. And we'll all starve if we lose those cattle. She pulled on every piece of warm clothing they owned. Juan and another man, Miguel, insisted on going with her. They stepped out into the blizzard, into a world of pure, violent chaos. She couldn't see 10 feet in front of her. They found the cattle bunched together, already covered in snow, their movements sluggish. They were starting to freeze where they stood. What followed was a nightmare. They fought to turn the herd, to force them toward the relative shelter of a small canyon. The wind tore at them. The snow blinded them. At one point, Sarah fell from her horse into a deep drift. The cold was so seductive, promising a peaceful, painless sleep. But Juan was there, dragging her to her feet, screaming words the wind ripped away. They saved most of the herd. When they finally stumbled back into the house, half frozen themselves, Thomas just held her, whispering her name over and over. You foolish, brave woman. The storm broke, revealing a world encased in ice. It also revealed something else. Wagons, approaching from town. Sarah grabbed the rifle, her first instinct to expect an attack. But as they got closer, she saw they weren't carrying torches. They were carrying lumber. Sheriff Cooper was at the head of the procession, and with him were the people of Cedar Ridge she least expected. The quiet ones. The ones who had never joined the mob. Mrs. Morrison, Cooper said, tipping his hat, heard you had some trouble. Martha Hensley, the banker's wife, climbed down from a wagon. I brought blankets, she said, not quite meeting Sarah's eyes. I know what it's like to be talked about. The German baker came forward, the widow from the boarding house, the blacksmith who knew what it was like to be an outcast. One by one they came, the silent majority who had finally had enough. Why? Sarah whispered, overwhelmed. Because you ran into a burning barn to save your husband, Cooper said. Because you rode into a blizzard to save your herd. Because maybe we're just tired of men like Harold Garrett telling us who to hate. They raised a new barn in 2 days, a flurry of hammers and saws and quiet cooperation. Garrett and his followers stayed away, seething in the town, their power broken. As the community shared a meal to celebrate, a lone rider approached. It was William Porter. I came to talk, he said, holding up his empty hands. He looked directly at Sarah. My father, he's dying. He was afraid. All that talk about morality, it was just fear. We did wrong things. I'm not asking you to forgive us. I just wanted you to know. He turned and rode away. Winter came, but this time they were ready. The new barn stood strong and proud against the sky. The boycott was over. One by one, the merchants started selling to them again. On a cold December morning, Sarah stood on the hill behind the house at Elizabeth's grave. "Thank you," she said to the wind, "for loving him first. I'll take good care of him." As she walked back down the hill, Thomas met her. "A letter came," he said, "from Ohio. It was from her late husband's sister. An apology and a confession. James had written to them before he died, begging them to look after Sarah, telling them she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. They had been too lost in their own grief to listen, until now." "Are you all right?" Thomas asked, seeing her tears. "Yes," she said, wiping them away. "It's just the past finally making peace with the present. That Christmas, their house was filled with life. Juan's family, the ranch hands, even some of the families from town. The house rang with laughter and music." Sarah caught Thomas watching her, his eyes full of a love so deep it took her breath away. "What is it?" she asked. "Just thinking," he said, pulling her close. "Last winter, you were dying in my barn. And you saved me," she whispered, kissing him. "In every way a person can be saved. The whispers in town might never fully die. There would always be those who looked away. But Sarah had learned that her worth wasn't something a town could give her or take away. It was forged in fire, tested in ice, and built on a love that had refused to die. She was no longer the outcast stumbling through the snow. She was Sarah Morrison, and she was finally home. Thank you so much for listening. If this story of courage and redemption on the frontier touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And if you want more tales of the Wild West that you won't find anywhere else, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. What did you think of Sarah and Thomas's journey? Share your thoughts below.